Can you guys hear it? All right. Well, welcome everybody to our first Taco Pitch Ask Me Anything live Zoom extravaganza, and it's not supposed to be playing anymore. This is kind of the first time we're doing this, so we'll just kind of see how it goes. But we wanted to let me get the slideshow going here real quick, just to kind of introduce things. Are you guys seeing my the slides here?
No.
No.
Just your beautiful face. Oh, here it comes.
Okay. All right. Now the slides are up?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So welcome to our Taco Pitch Ask Me Anything. This is hopefully going to be a little bit different format than what we sometimes see on webinars. And it's just kind of we wanted an opportunity where you could ask the questions that you don't usually get to ask. A lot of times on podcasts, it seems like the focus is just on the process of writing the book, or the process of producing that one book, but it's kind of tends to be kind of surface level details. And the reason I started this event was because I want to know a little bit more about that process, or about getting an agent. What's it like when you get an agent? What kind of communications do you have? How often do you communicate? How do royalties work? What happens between when you sign with an agent and when you get your first book deal, and etc. And so I threw this idea out to various authors and illustrators, and they thought it was an awesome idea. And so we're going to try to do kind of themed panels going forward. So this one, we've got two debut nonfiction authors, picture book authors, Kate Allen Fox, whose book Pando is coming out, I think, next week. And then Jennifer Harris's book, She Stitched the Stars, I think is coming out October 1st. And if I have those wrong, they can correct me when they are up. And just kind of some housekeeping rules. Don't be dumb, don't be mean. I'll just go ahead and read this. Producer Josh wrote this for us. Taco Pitch and Taco Pitch AMA Ask Me Anything are safe, inclusive spaces that should make us all feel warm, like we're wrapped in a big tortilla covered in deliciousness. These events are meant to be filled with whimsy and fun. Any discriminatory, political, racist, targeting, harassing, or offensive language, messages, or behavior is grounds for removal from Taco Pitch AMA and disbarring from participation in future events, subject to the discretion of the Taco Pitch organizers. In other words, if you act up, we're going to kick you out, which means I can't make fun of Canadians like I sometimes do. Karen, Curtis, you'll be relieved to hear that. Thank you for the wave. Yeah, we just want to have a fun, exciting discussion. So the format is we're going to have Kate just talk for about 5 minutes about her book, just to tell us about herself and her book for a few minutes, and then we'll throw it over to Jennifer and let her talk for about 5 minutes about her book and a little bit about herself. And then we'll just dive into questions. We'll have a mix of questions that have already been submitted on Twitter, and then you are free to ask questions here here live. And so actually, Josh, you want to chime in and explain kind of the best process for that?
Yeah, to keep to keep everything orderly and so that we can hear Kate and Jennifer as they answer the questions. If everyone could keep themselves on mute, I know you're muted on entry when you come in, but if you could keep yourself on mute and then use, as you see on the left-hand side, the raise hand feature, I'll make sure and note that you have a question that you want to ask live, and we'll make sure and just intersperse some of the prepared questions with those who have raised their hands that may have a follow-up question or something that they've thought of off the top of their heads. I don't think muting in 2021, mid-2021, is going to be strange to anyone. Just noting it here, just if you can keep yourself muted when you're not talking, that's going to keep everything focused and orderly again. And thanks.
Okay, thanks, Josh. All right. So I will let Kate introduce herself. I'll actually stop the share, but here's her cover on her soon to be released book. And I will just stop that and let Kate take it from here.
Well, first of all, thank you all for being here. Thanks to Team Taco Pitch for putting this together. I know it seems silly, but this is a hardworking crew and they worked hard to pull this together and support authors in so many ways. So thanks, Taco team. So as Mark said, I'm Kate Allen Fox. I'm author of Pando, A Living Wonder of Trees, which comes out August 15th, which is this Sunday, which is very exciting. It's my debut picture book. It's a lyrical nonfiction picture book about one of the oldest and largest living things on Earth, a grove of aspen trees in Utah, all connected by their roots. But it really has a stronger conservation message that's a little broader than just Pando itself. So a little bit about me. I've always wanted to be a writer. I was very cool in high school and kept a poetry notebook. I'm sure many of us were very cool in high school. But I didn't go into writing in college because I liked the idea of being able to pay rent. So I went to a state school, did political science, did public policy, and then I worked at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention for almost 10 years, where I did a lot of congressional relations, and describing science to members of Congress is a lot like describing it to 6-year-olds. So I had some transferable skills. So around the time my second son was born, my husband and I were able to make some life changes, and we decided I was going to quit. We were going to move, and I decided this was the time I was really going to try to write. So I started trying to write novels. I really didn't want to write picture books because I felt like everyone was writing picture books, and I'm a contrarian by nature. So I wrote a middle grade novel, which was not good, but I had some other writing successes. I got an essay in the New York Times, and it was enough to like keep me going that I was like, maybe I can write. So I kept at it, and then I started writing picture books. And I think we'll talk a little bit more about our road to publishing the book, but it's been such a meaningful journey. And I'm so glad to share it with the wonderful people like the ones on this Zoom. So I think I'll stop there for now, and we'll just talk about the rest later.
Mark, you're still muted. I can see you talking.
Sorry about that. I went to share my screen and then everything went wonky on me. What are you seeing on your screen now? Are you seeing the slide again?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. So I just briefly just wanted to show you the cover of Jennifer's book, and I will just throw it to Jennifer.
Okay, I'm also going to thank the Tacoites for pulling this all together. It was wonderful, and I'm so thrilled to be participating in this. I am Jennifer Harris. My first book, She Stitched the Stars, as Mark said, comes out October 1st, and that's with Albert Whitman. My second, with HarperCollins, When You Were New, comes out in 2023. No cover for that yet, but the pictures are beautiful, according to what I've seen of the early sketches. I am an English professor, and I specialize in literary history. I knew I wanted to write when I was very young. I can remember being 9 or 10 and thinking I could be a writer. This is what I want to do. And I looked at people who were writing. You know, Gordon Corman grew up just a few hours from me and published his first book at age 12. And then I had a copy of Ali Sheedy's She Was Nice to Mice, which she published at age 12. And so when I hit age 12 and I hadn't published a novel, I thought, well, that's it, I'm over the hill. Clearly, I had kinds of issues with perspective, but I went and did a PhD instead because that seemed easier than being a washout at age 12. And I now specialize in literary history, and I particularly look at 19th century writers, women writers, and figures. And so I was looking for new subjects, and I stumbled across Ellen Harding Baker and this solar system quilt she'd made, and it was marvelous. And I couldn't figure out how to write about her as an academic subject. I was completely stumped, and not just because there weren't enough resources. I mean, I'm an academic, I could build an argument around that. but because it didn't seem like the right format, the right genre. And so I took a stab at writing a picture book, and it wasn't even sort of a deliberate thing. I just wrote it. And that's how this came about. This career was that I just needed to write about this woman in the right genre where it would reach the most number of people. And in this case, it's children, because it's a picture book, and the book is framed through the perspective of her children. The story is told through her children. So they remain at the center of the text. It's not a picture book biography. But I was very lucky that I managed to find an agent and a press, and I am so excited that it will be out soon.
All right, well, thank you. Let's just dive right into questions. The first one comes from my critique partner and newly agented author, Tara Sheroff. She wants to know what your favorite taco toppings are.
Starting with the hard-hitting questions. I have to go guacamole. I mean, is there another correct answer? No, there's not.
That's the only correct answer.
Does sriracha count? I will say the best tacos I've had were fish tacos in Missoula, Montana.
That's surprising.
I know, yeah. Of all things, those are probably the most amazing tacos I've ever had.
Okay, all right, fair enough. All right, well, let's get into a real question. Not that your question wasn't important, Tara, but
Tara.
There's been some talk on Twitter lately about advances and how they're splitting them up across 4 and sometimes even 5. What can you tell us about advances, just in general or specifically?
Okay. Do you want to go first, or should I, Jennifer? I don't want to.
Well, I'll say I'm with 2 different presses, right? So, and every press is going to do it differently. One is a big 5, one is a smaller press. And both of them gave me the entire advance up front. I will say, without getting into numbers, because I don't want to do that, that the big 5 does pay more, right? And so, of course, my agent is certainly motivated to sell to a big 5 press rather than the smaller independent ones, because they, of course, get a commission.
So I've had some other experiences. I would say that I've heard a lot of advances being split into at least 2 parts. One, when you sign the contract, and the second, when final edits are accepted. And contracts can often take a few months after the offer to come through. So it doesn't immediately, once you get the offer, you get the advance. It could be half a few months later, and then half 6 months after that. Or, as Mark's alluding to, some are, I'm hearing, up to 4 parts, which might be signing the contract, edits accepted, publication date, and a year after publication date. So there are a lot of different ways that advances can be meted out. I know that my agent and many agents try to get it into fewer bundles. That way you aren't waiting for your money for forever. So it can be a longer process than you might think when you hear the word advance. And then as far as sizes, I think like the definitive resource on this is Hannah Holt's website. She does a lot of survey data, and she breaks it down by size of publisher, what you're publishing. And so there's a lot of great information out there to give you just like a sense of how much money is actually coming through in advances for your own awareness. I think it helps to have like realistic expectations in this industry. Or any.
Certainly one of the things that Hannah stresses is that people who had agents got bigger advances.
For sure.
But that doesn't account for what the agent's cut was, right? I'm not quite clear whether the agent's cut is factored into the amount of money they report getting or not. So it's kind of a 6 of one, half a dozen of another.
And for those of you who don't know, a standard agent cut is 15%. You'll see that across the industry. Some of the other numbers are more fungible, but it's probably going to be 15% for just the agent's cut.
I've seen a Google Doc circulating that actually has it's anonymous, and people put in there like what their advances are.
Yeah. That was part of Publishing Paid Me.
Yeah. In fact, Karen Yin just put it in the in the comment section. So
Mhm.
that's a great, very eye-opening resource, especially if you're a picture book author and you see some of the advances that are going to some of the adult novels, especially where the money can be just insanely huge. Anything
You
else
can
you want to
see
talk about on the advances or
I
royalties?
would say in Publishers Weekly, they will say there is a rubric for whether something is a good advance, a very good advance. So you'll see phrasing, and you can actually Google that phrasing and see what is defined
Oh,
Yeah, like
under
a nice deal and those kind of phrases.
yeah, I've
They
seen
have
like very nice deal and nice deal. And I always wondered that. I didn't know that that those had a specific range attached to them. That's good to know.
Yes.
I think of the print version, it's actually like in the cover, but who's ever like sees the print version anymore? So.
Okay. All right. I thought this was an interesting question. And Jennifer, I know you said you might want to talk about this one. Matt Forrest Eisenwine asked, why did this book need to be written?
Yeah, and I think that that's a two-part answer. The first is, why did you feel the need to write a book, right? And often, as human beings, we feel an overwhelming compulsion to create, right? So why did this book need to be written is really the question of, why did you feel there was something in it, right? And that isn't necessarily about the text, it's about the creative process. And for a lot of people, that creative process itself is very fantastic. Ooh, somebody just put the dollar amount in the chat for the nice deals. And then there's the thing about, what about this book makes it important, right? Because let's be clear, there are books that get published that are tie-ins to movies that aren't necessarily important in terms of the subject matter. They're important in terms of the dollar value and the franchise and whatnot. But is there something about this book that, you know, unites us as people? Is it charming? Does it provide humor? Does it provide a moral? And I'm not necessarily, you know, I'm not a big fan of overly didactic children's literature. Does it inspire in some way? Is it meaningful? If you think about those books that stayed with you from your childhood, and then think about someone asking them, well, why did it need to be published, right? Maybe there isn't an obvious answer that author would have had at the time about the long-term meaning of that book, but that doesn't change that book has some kind of profound resonance for you as an individual.
Yeah, I think that is very on target. We need to be somewhat clear-eyed about our own work and where it fits and what it's bringing to a reader beyond what it brings to us. However, I think when you're creating, getting in touch with what it means to you is what's going to create the special something that it means for a reader. So in my process, and what I recommend to others, is really staying with that internal flame as long as you can. And then when you start critiquing and preparing it to go out to agents and editors, that's when you want to really be thoughtful about, where does it fit in the market? What is the hook? Why is someone paying $18 for this book? What does it add to the canon of, you know, I don't know, thousands of children's books that have already been published? And that's when I think you can start being a little more critical about this question of the need for the book. But I do think early in the process, it's easy to squelch that creative energy by saying, this has been done before. There's been books about trees. Does this add anything new? And I think as artists too, the need is that we want to create something that enhances the human experience, whether that's through laughter or poetry or activism. And so don't let that spark die out before you get it on the page.
So what kind of manuscripts tend to break through to get you that first book deal?
So I can start on that one. I think as debuts, a really strong concept is very important, because there's so many talented picture book authors who have already been published, already have connections, already know editors that can write the next book on a topic you might see a lot in the library, like I write about nature, so let's say volcanoes. There's been a lot of volcano books. There'll probably be more volcano books. But to me, and I don't know if this is true, this is my theory, is that if an editor wants a volcano book, they already know agents they can go ask for authors they already know for a volcano book. So I think having a really strong, unique hook that hasn't been done before separates you from already published authors, because you have something that they can't just go and ask for. You've created a hook or a need that they didn't think of. And so they can't go to someone else and ask for that book, or they don't have it sitting in their inbox because you've found a unique hook. And I think for me, for Pando, I think I wrote it well, but every person I sent that to was like, wow, how have I not heard of this? This is so interesting. Pando, not necessarily my writing, not denigrating my writing, just that the concept itself stood out. And another writer who I know who just got her debut deal, it was also similarly like a really strong concept. So I think as you're sending out what will be your debut, having a super strong hook is really helps you stand apart from the crowd. My 2 cents.
One way to think about that is in middle grade and young adult, they talk about something being a high concept book, right? And so what is this concept that is new or fresh or novel, right? And so it would be very easy to write a book about a little boy who gets a dog and learns to care for it, and the dog doesn't behave, but eventually they become friends and it all works out and he's glad, right? That doesn't have a high concept. So, what would you do to mix that up? If that was really a story you wanted to tell, what would make that story high concept?
So just thinking about like, comp titles, you've got a book about trees or about, whatever. What are your best research resources? Like, how do you figure out what's already been written on that subject to make yours stand out and to give it a hook?
So one of the things that I was told when picking comp titles, because I think it's very easy to look for books that are on the same topic or very similar, but what an editor said to me when I was talking to her was, don't think about books that are on the same topic necessarily. Think about your buyer. So the buyer who buys your book, what other books are they going to buy? So that's a different way of kind of looking at your bookshelves or looking at your comp titles and thinking less in terms of either plot or topic and more in terms of thematics or in terms of style. And I think that's a kind of different way of going about it. And then I think you find that you actually probably already know, because those are probably the kinds of books you're reading.
Yes, 100%. So when I went to comp books, I didn't comp their tree books, for example. I comp other very lyrical books because that's my style. And so lyrical books about nature, that gets you the idea of the types of editors, the types of houses we could go to, the types of buyers who might be interested. But they weren't tree books. They were about other things. So I think if you can comp for voice or themes, as Jennifer's saying, that's your best bet. You don't want to tell an agent, here are 3 other books on the exact same topic, because then you're kind of like saying, maybe there's no place in the market for this book.
Awesome, thank you. By the way, I see a question about whether or not there will be a recording after this. We will put this on our Taco Pitch YouTube channel. And so after the recording's processed and everything, so it'll probably be up in the next day or so. And I think we're going to take a live question. I think Tara had a question. So if you want to, no? Okay. I had in my, Josh sent me a message saying somebody wanted, I thought it was Tara. All right.
Hand went down.
Oh, the hand went down. Okay. All right. Does anybody want to ask a live question right now before I go to some of the prepared ones? Just put your hand up if you got one. Nope. Okay. All right. I thought this was a great question. What did you start doing or stop doing that helped you get your first big break? And this is from drawn by Heidi Lagrasta.
I think that's a great question too, because I think a lot of us go in with a sense that we want to be writers, or at least that was my goal. And writing's a broad world. So for me personally, the things I needed to do were a lot of experimenting, quite honestly. I thought I would write novels. That isn't where my road went. I didn't really even think to write poetically at first, although my early picture books have an element of lyricism to that. But I think just staying open to like experimenting until you find a voice that really clicks for you is super important. And it's going to be different what you start or stop doing. There's some like get a lot of feedback is a good one. One thing I did, I was very active on the 12 by 12 forum when I was writing this book. And I wrote this book, like I decided in December 2018 that 2019 was going to be my year of the picture book. I wrote this in January, February, and got my agent in April. So it was like one of my earlier picture books. So I needed like a ton of feedback. I wrote it at first at like informational fiction about a little tree and she's waving, and like that wasn't ever going to work. But if I had not gotten so much feedback so fast, I wouldn't have like iterated enough to get to the right forum. So lots of feedback's really important, getting used to getting feedback, taking it well and being inspired by it rather than being attacked by it, which is also something I had to practice. I think most people do. And then just being open to finding what it is that is uniquely you, because in the end, that's what you're going to write well.
So this is an interesting question for me. So we joked earlier that I'm a bit of a unicorn in that I wrote my first picture book in January. This was it. I picked my top agent. I sent it to her. She signed me. And then I was signed with the press by June. So that makes it sound very easy. But the bigger thing is that I am used to writing about recovering lives. Right. So what made me break through in the picture book world is that I am writing about the lives of lost women or forgotten women. And I knew that I needed to write this in another genre. So really it was about looking at a story, knowing what the right genre was for it, and then moving forward. And I think that's what, kind of propelled the trajectory, that it was the right place. And then I joined critique groups, who have been wonderful in doing, subsequent work. But it really was that I'd had this long apprenticeship in thinking about how to write about people when there isn't a lot of documentation about them. And that just parlayed itself into another form in this instance.
On the topic of documentation, what format do you use in terms of citations? Because you both do nonfiction. Is there a specific style that agents or editors prefer that you submit in?
Chicago style is considered the standard, but I always say, like, don't stress about it. It's the easiest thing on earth to change. So.
Okay.
So I didn't really have to. So the picture book itself, because there aren't a lot of sources about her, because as a woman, she wasn't deemed worthy of preservation in the same way. I had to kind of take the spine of what I knew about her life, which was that she made this quilt, she had children, it took her several years, and then build the story around this very lyrical story around the passage of time and what happens. Children get older and the seasons pass and all of these things. And then the back matter is where the historical, there's a historical note that covers 2 pages. And in that instance, I simply incorporated it into the text and said, the census tells us that. And so in that instance, because, citing the 1870 census, if I was doing secondary source research, I think there might have been a need for a bibliography, but I was doing primary source research because that's how I'm trained as a literary historian. So that I could use in another way. I could say, a newspaper advertised this without needing to necessarily do the whole thing, because your 10-year-old reader isn't going to go delve into primary source resources. That will be on the website with the educator's guide that's going up. That information will be available. So I've kind of done an end run around that in terms of exposing children to archival documents.
That brings up a good point about the bibliography in the published book. It's probably going to be shorter and different than what you submit with manuscript. So I submitted about like 2 pages of sources with my manuscript. The idea being, some editors say they look at that first with nonfiction. It depends on, they just want to see that you aren't dabbling. You've done sufficient research. Now, when you go to print the book, you aren't going to put all of that in there. That's valuable real estate in a picture book. So the sources you'll see in a published picture book will be a few resources that are good for kids mostly and available online. So we pick things that have a paywall and were somewhat written at a level for kids. And that's what goes in the book. But when you submit your manuscript, I don't think it ever hurts to put all of your, if you're writing nonfiction, put it all in there, show that you've done your work, especially if you aren't like, have a strong professional background in the area, you know, like Jennifer obviously does. But if you're trying to show that you've done the work, I don't think it ever hurts.
Okay. Now, in terms of revisions, from the time you submit something to the, you know, it goes on sub, they want it. Talk about revisions. What kind they ask for? How many back and forths do you have? Just talk a little bit about that.
So I had 2 rounds of revisions. They were not overly substantive. There were some small things. I actually had fewer edits than I thought I would. Some wording things, some making things a little more plain language, less scientific in a couple of spots where I didn't realize I was a little bit, vocabulary was a little too high. The one big thing that changed is at one point I did, like I had a page that compared the weight of Pando to like however many thousand elephants or kind of a social math thing like that. And that got through the first round of revisions. It was in there. And then they went to illustrate it. And the art director said, wow, we have a forest scene on this half of the spread. And over here we got elephants, polar bears, and trucks. This looks awful. And so it was a good point. I hadn't thought of that. So we cut that. And then they added a timeline, which was kind of tricky. So if you're writing nonfiction and you're working with scientists, scientists like accuracy and book readers and media like certainty. And so they wanted a timeline of like exactly how old is Pando. And I knew from my research that this was a point of contention. But this also came up a lot in my job at CDC where the scientists would be like, well, actually, and they'd be like, we need one sentence. So I like worked in some of the like, we think it might be. And so there is a sort of back and forth about getting the science right, but also delivering what the reader wants.
I recently went back over the first version and the final version, and there wasn't that much shift. The main change was in the first version, because we know that people had some opposition to Ellen Harding Baker making this quilt. So she stitched a quilt of the solar system and she wanted to use it for educational purposes to teach astronomy. And, you know, the New York Times kind of was a bit condescending in their response to this, you know, a bit like she's a talking dog or something. And I wanted to have that opposition in the book without suddenly having a sideline about the New York Times. And so initially I had a grandmother figure who came in and was the one who was opposed to these kinds of creative moves that she was making. And what my agent said to me was, grandmothers buy books. You can't have a grandmother. And someone said, well, what about an aunt? It's like, oh, aunts buy books. You can't have the aunt being the repository of negativity. And then it became, well, what about the minister's wife? I'm like, oh, let's not even get into the religious, you know, aspects of this. And homeschoolers buy books and Christian homeschoolers buy books. So it became kind of this amorphous, almost a Greek chorus of women who had this opposition, who were whispering. And that was the major shift. But it really was in many ways driven by the market, right? Things you don't think about. And I laugh because I've been working on something with my critique group, and there's a realtor in it who's, you know, acerbic and unlikable. And someone said, well, what about realtors? You don't want to offend realtors. I'm like, no, I think we're good on this one. I can offend, there's got to be a group somewhere I can offend, nothing against realtors. But, you know, you can't just say everybody has to be good because they buy books. The second book was interesting because it's kind of a lyrical, poetic book about a parent reminding a child of the things they didn't know when they were new. And in that instance, they were just thinking about the progression of the story in the pages. and they removed a stanza so that it would, they could kind of fit what they wanted to fit on the page spreads. Works for me.
So on that note, we actually just had a question come in from Christy Newsom, and she wonders how late into the process can you still make changes to your manuscript? She says, I imagine as illustrations and editor comments come in, you're still changing things. So yeah, talk on that.
Until it goes to print. Yeah, go ahead.
I think it depends on the press, and you sign off on things, right? And you've got to remember that edits are also, they're visual edits in terms of what's in the pictures as well that get changed. So, you know, I had a chance when I saw the final page proofs for the first book to go through them again and make sure that nothing was out of place. But at the same time, that's not when you're doing like, I think that word doesn't sound right, or I think I want to change this. It's like, no, that's good. Your editor signed off on it. This is just to catch errors. But I lost a character in the last round. So, you know, this is a woman who had many children and she had sons, and the first editor wanted to focus on the daughters. So the daughters made it into the illustrations, but because she had so many sons, there was a boy. And my first editor left the press and a second editor came and she was, what's this boy doing here? And so he, you know, that was it. The boy didn't make it into the advanced review copies.
And that does raise a good point that you do get to give input on the illustrations as well. I wouldn't overuse that, you know, because you don't want to meddle in someone else's art, just as you wouldn't want the illustrator telling you how to move around your verbs. But for me as a nonfiction writer, it was really about, are these illustrations visually accurate? Is how I saw my role. And small things can change to the end, but as Jennifer's saying, yes, you know, once the editor is already happy with it, it's not time to like suddenly think, oh, we better change this, because you mostly want to keep it pretty small if you have a last minute change.
And certainly, like you, I was kind of looking for historical accuracy. My first editor, Wendy McClure, has actually written a book about living like Laura Ingalls Wilder for a year, right? And so this is a woman who knows the 19th century, early 20th century really well. And so the poor illustrator was getting notes from us like, no, there would not be a doll who had on a sleeveless dress in 1870, whatever. And so these were the kinds of historical notes.
Mm-hmm. That's really cool. Okay, I had a question come in via direct message. And they wanted to have you chime in on it, Jennifer. They wondered, is it possible for a white writer to write a story about a Black historical figure?
So I do this in terms of my academic work, and academics is very different. I would be cautious about the subject I was writing about. And in academics, I can, because I'm doing original firsthand recuperative work for an academic audience. And we've already rehashed this in academics and it's been done. And if it's the work's good, the work's good. It's a very different argument that's happening in picture books. And I would tread very carefully. Often they will pair you with an illustrator that is the race of the person you're writing about, or depending on the illustrator, if and your characters are, the race isn't marked, that may reflect the illustrator's race. But I would be careful, because I have actually seen agents online saying that they're looking at manuscripts and they're not willing to acquire something because they are white authors writing consistently about people from marginalized backgrounds to which they don't belong to. So agents have been quite clear about this. And I think there are reasons to hold space in this instance that are really important.
Yeah, because this is something that I'm concerned about as well, just because you know, I've got a PhD in Mesoamerican archaeology, so like the ancient Maya and the Aztec, and academically that's what I publish on. And you know, I've thought about maybe trying to write some picture books, but I'm not sure if I'm allowed to do that, because I'm not Latino or, indigenous in any way. Any thoughts on that? Or since it is my area of expertise?
Well, I think it's about, if I was going to write something historical about an area in where I am the expert, and there are certainly African-American historical figures about whom I am the expert, like no contest, that's not me being egotistical, it's just a statement of fact. Yeah. Then that would be a very different thing. If I felt that there were enough other people out there who were capable of writing about that person, then I might step back. There's someone I've thought about writing about, and I've offered all of the research to another person who is Black who's interested in writing, and said, if you want this firsthand research, but I know the story I would write because it speaks to me and because I know her life so well. I don't know that that person feels that same connection with her. So I just think it's something that you want to sit with and be really careful about.
Yeah, that's why I'm sticking to birds pooping on vans for the time being. So, all right, let's see. All right, shifting gears a little bit. I thought this was a great question. This is from Colleen Pafe. She said, I want to know how Kate and Jennifer make time for deep, focused work amidst all the other responsibilities vying for their attention. And then kind of an addendum to this thread, Cal Newport chimed in and said, the common habit of working in a state of semi-distraction is potentially devastating to your performance. So how do you do it with everything you've got going on?
Well, I read Cal Newport's book, Deep Work, which they were talking about for this discussion. And I kind of had a similar reaction to some of the women in that thread, that it's difficult as women, as parents of young children. I have 2 young boys. I do try to carve out dedicated time for me that's in the middle of the day when one is napping, where I can do somewhat less distracted work. I feel like Cal Newport would not approve of my writing process, but that's also my reality at this point. I have signed my son up for certain activities because I know they're next door to the library where I can go and write for an hour in quiet. I think for me, it's constantly changed. My children are 3 and 5, and they change quickly, and their nap schedules have changed. And so I'm always adapting. I feel like it's a situation, for me at least, where I don't want to let perfect be the enemy of the good. If I'm getting work done and I'm publishing books and I'm achieving my dreams and finding a way to weave work out of it, then I'm not going to mess with it too much. I will say that a lot of my ideas and really good writing comes after I've gone on a walk in nature. I do a lot of thinking in my head. I do a lot of writing in my head. And when I'm sitting at my desk writing it down, it really is just transcribing it because I've already written it in my head. And so that's when I'm able to kind of get in the zone. Kiara is asking the name of the Newport book. It's called Deep Work. And it is good. It's worth reading in an undistracted state.
I've met your boys and they are very precocious.
Oh, thank you. I like them.
Yeah.
I'm reminded of, and this was attributed to Tilly Olson, the writer. I don't know if she's the one who actually said it first, but the idea that mothers are always interruptible. And that has very much been my experience during the pandemic, that schools have been closed, the children have been home. Guess what? Children in grade 1 can't run 10 Zoom meetings a day independently. So somebody has to be there. And my partner is wonderful and he's fantastic, but he's running a lab as well. And he's in a meeting with the Ministry of Defense. He's in a meeting with Facebook or Google. So who is the most interruptible person in this? It would be me, because, national security is kind of a thing people care about. So yeah, so I'm very aware that my time has been chipped away at. And I am also feel fortunate that picture books they're a bit like poems, right? They're small and they're concrete, and you can live with a single picture book in your head as this kind of discrete object. And it's so much easier than, and Mark, you would know this, managing a 30-page academic paper in your head and trying to juggle all of these things. So my academic writing hasn't done as well during the pandemic as my children's book writing, simply because the one way I have been able to carve out writing space for myself is by focusing on small, discrete projects, and then not having too many on the go at once, and talking them over with my family, reading them to the children, right? Telling the children about them as we go for walks, this kind of thing, so that they're actually engaged. But I also will find myself, twice in the last 2 weeks, it's midnight, I'm awake in bed because I'm stressed, the universe is, insane. And I start going through the plots of various things I'm working on, and I will have to get up and write everything down. And that's the only time that's solitary in the house. Because if I get up, I love the 5 a.m. writers people, but if I get up at 5 a.m., the floors are going to creak and the children will come running.
Yeah, I tried the 5 a.m. Writers Club, but then I joined the 9 a.m. napping club. I couldn't sustain it for more than a few days. Thank you for that. All right, let's switch gears again. Talking about agents, when you knew that you were going to receive the call, when an agent had to schedule a call with you for the first time, what did you do to prepare for it? Right? What's that first call like, and how did you prepare for it?
Promiscuous Googling.
Yeah.
I Googled everything I could about what you should ask an agent, what you should know. And then I taped a Post-it note to my computer saying, don't talk, listen, or something like that. I mean, it probably said more something like, shut up. So that I was letting the agent talk and not, in a case of nerves or excitement, talking over them. And I had my list, and those are the things I went through, and I still couldn't quite believe that I was getting the call. I didn't believe that the call was the call. I just thought it was the agent calling going, hi, how are you doing? So that was an interesting experience. Kate, it might have been different, very different for you.
I had seen discussions on different kidlit groups about what to ask. So I had a sense that there were resources out there. Bookends has a good list. I kind of just collected my own questions in that way. And like Jennifer, I was really just going to let the agent lead the call. Now, I've queried twice and signed with 2 different agents at this point in my career. So I've gone through that process a couple of times. And the second time around, I was a little more comfortable talking more about my long-term goals and all of that. I would say if you're on a call with an agent, you're going to get a representation offer, unless, I don't know, you do something terrible on the call, but they don't like to waste their time that way. And so I would just try to relax as much as you can and really get the sense for the agent as a person who you're going into a long-term partnership with. And if it's someone you trust and like, quite honestly, and all the other like things to make sure they're legitimate and good at their jobs, of course, but don't worry too much about it. It'll be okay.
There's a question in the comment section. Do you have the agent that got away?
So this is an interesting question for me. My current agent, Leslie Zampetti, has talked about it too. So when I got offers on Pando, Leslie actually offered me representation for Pando. And I signed with someone else, Mary Cummings, who does book by book. And I did that for a few reasons unrelated to not liking Leslie. I thought she was great. But Mary had invested a lot of time in revising recent Mets on Pando. And also, as I was saying, I only had one good picture book at the time. I didn't even know if I was going to keep writing picture books. So I was like, I'll go with the book by book agent and figure it out. And then as time passed, and fortunately Pando sold, and so my contract with Mary came to an end quite nicely and amicably, but I still thought about Leslie and how much I liked her. So when I got back to querying, I immediately queried Leslie to be like, hi, we talked last year. I have some good news stuff. I think you'll like it. Can you please consider me again? So she was my agent who got away just because we clicked so well, and it's working out great. I love Leslie.
I will say, I think it's funny that I had my top choice, and I was fortunate that I signed with the first person I pitched. But since then, I have had someone private message me saying, if you weren't already signed by this person, I would, be trying to sign you. And someone else was really in love with one of my manuscripts, another agent who came across it in another forum and was very generous and kind of, interested. But of course I had an agent. So I think it's one of those things that, and they would have been a very interesting agent as well. But I am so grateful to my agent. And as I said, she was my top choice and I'm thrilled.
We just had a question come in from Christy Nuttall asking if you both continue to plan, or if you plan on continuing writing nonfiction picture books, or are you going to dabble in fiction at all?
I write pretty much exclusively nonfiction picture books at this point, and they're pretty much all related to science and nature. I like it. It seems to work for me. I try other things. I do occasionally. I have punny books. It was kind of funny when I was first pouring, I queried some of those punny books, and people were like, "They're funny, but not quite funny enough." And I think that's me. I'm like mildly funny, and if you're going to write funny, you got to be really funny. So I think this is kind of my niche. I am experimenting with a middle grade novel in verse, which has been a really energizing challenge. I don't know that it'll ever see the light of day, but I personally find a lot of creative energy by trying new things and new challenges, because part of what I loved about writing picture books was figuring it out, like how do they work? And so recapturing some of that energy has been pretty cool. What about you, Jennifer?
She Stitched the Stars is a fictionalized version of a historical event. So it very much is very lyrical and fictional. To the point where one editor said, well, I don't really know who, from a Big Five, who liked it when they found out that I couldn't say that that she actually said this line. He's like, well, I can't take that because I like books where we know for sure that someone said what they said. And my thought was, yes, but this is the problem with historical figures who are under-recorded. If we don't talk about them because we don't have enough documentation, then we're simply part of the problem. Which is a bit of a tangent, but at any rate, an interesting to think about if you're kind of bridging between fiction and nonfiction. So my second book is definitely fiction, and I have poetry published as well in a couple of different places. And I do have a middle grade novel I've been working on as well. And that is, my agent has looked at that now and really likes it. So we will see where that goes.
Okay. This question comes from Kiara Columbi. How much of your book launch activities / promo materials were organized by you alone, and how much were organized or facilitated by your publisher and or agent?
So I'm launching on Sunday, so I'm kind of have everything set up that's going to be set up. So I guess I can try that one first. Most of it was me. I think it varies by publisher. It varies by size of publisher, their resources. I'm with Capstone. I'm in their trade publishing arm, but they are mostly school and library market. So I think they have a somewhat different focus than you would have, say, at a publisher that was purely focused on trade, which isn't at all to insult what they do. It's just different. So a lot of it's been on me. I've set up a blog I reached out to bookstores to set up events. I have, I think, 3 bookstore events. I reached out to a children's museum. One thing my publisher did put me on, which was amazing, was School Library Journal did Picture Book Palooza. And there were over 200 editors on it. And I was on a panel with Don Tate, of all people. I was like, wow, I was starry-eyed. And I was just like, I'll just sit here and be quiet, but the real people talk. So that was an amazing opportunity that they got me in, and they have some internal things that they've done for me. So I think it's really a balance. And as an author, I don't know, you didn't ask for my advice, but my advice would be just do the things you like and you feel like you can handle. People will be doing a million different things. Don't wear yourself out. Try to enjoy it.
So my press, and I can only speak to Albert Whitman right now because HarperCollins, we haven't gotten to that part. They do the kind of standard stuff. They do the same thing for all their picture books in terms of industry libraries where they send for reviews. If I want specialized things, say I want to contact different quilt museums and their gift shops and see about getting the book into gift shops. That's something that I have to assemble that information, research that myself. Again, if I want it reviewed in specialist publications like quilting magazines, if I wanted an article, I would have to reach out to those magazines. So if anyone knows anyone at quilting magazines, please. So I've got an Excel sheet that I'm working on that right now, and different kinds of places to reach out. And I've been working on, it's completely wackadoodle, but my children, there's no summer camp. So they've launched a virtual book tour. We've done it as a family on Instagram, which is hysterical, using their toys. And the nice thing about that is, I mean, talking about how to manage your career with children at home, I can give them things to do during the day that actually are part of my work and benefit my career in some way. So I'm using the free labor of having children at home while also creating creative activities for them. It's a bit like camp. They're going to Instagram social media camp this summer. So there's that. And the idea is that by the time I get around to doing interviews, then there will be this very quirky thing online that people can draw from as well. That's kind of a neat angle about pandemic parenting and how people juggle. And certainly I've done one interview that's coming out in September, and that was one that I secured that will be using some of those images from Instagram and talking about, how to juggle pandemic parenting.
That's awesome. Yeah, I've had fun keeping up with your Instagram and seeing all those pictures. Your kids are doing a great job with that. I think we'll just, we're pretty much out of time, but I want to cover this one that Brenna typed into the comment. She said, is it typical for agents to sign book by book contracts, or is it more common for an agent to be looking for career clients?
So I would say, go ahead.
My experience is career clients, right? Because picture books, you don't get huge. We talked about this with you see how much people make for selling a novel versus selling a picture book. Yeah, they want to do more than one, because one picture book isn't worth the time they're investing in you. So they do want to hear a bit on the call about what else you have. And that's why when you're querying, you shouldn't just have one polished manuscript. You should have like 6 polished manuscripts. So they can see what you have, what's available, get a sense of you in terms of your career and your arc. And they will ask you often, this is one of the questions you find, how you imagine your career unfolding.
So I would say, yes, that's more common. I was with a book by book agent, or as I stated, for Pando. So it does happen. There are certain agents who tend to work that way more often than not, but I would say it's the exception more than the rule, and for all the very good reasons Jennifer stated.
All right, I think that's pretty much it for time. So I'm not sure if are you seeing my my slide here with the big taco thank you? Yes. Okay. So our next AMA is just in a few weeks with Karen Yin and Benson Schum. I've got Karen's book back here, Whole Whale. It's a fantastic book. Thank you so much for Kate and Jennifer. Give them a little round of applause here. And then for anybody that wants to stick around, I am going to end the recording here, and we can just kind of hang out and chat and ask each other questions. I mean, there's other published authors here, but I will stop the recording.